When you're looking at a 6-bay NAS, the first thing that pops into my head is the endless what-if scenario. What if I buy a box that's too slow for my team's workflow? What if the drives I finally slot in are fine, but the processor can't keep up with the transcode I need for a media library? What if the price tag looks great on paper, but the real-world performance feels like a bottleneck? Those are the exact doubts that keep most of us up at night, especially when the spec sheet reads like a tech magazine ad. I'm not here to hype the numbers, I'm here to tell you whether this QNAP TVS 6758 GUS actually lives up to the promise of a fast, flexible home or small office server, and whether it saves you from buying the wrong thing. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's break down the core of what this unit is trying to be. It's a 6-bay desktop NAS that bundles an 8-core AMD ZhaoXin KXU 6580 CPU at 2.5 GHz, 8 GB of DDR4 RAM, expandable to 64 GB, and dual 2.5 GBE ports that can fall back to 1 GBE or 100 MBE. In theory, that's more than enough horsepower to handle a small business that needs simultaneous file sharing, a media server for a family of streamers, and maybe a couple of surveillance cameras. In practice, the real question is how those pieces work together when you sit down and actually start using the device. First, let's talk about the network side, because that's where the high-speed claim gets tested. The dual 2.5 GBE ports are a nice upgrade over the older generation of 1 GB only NAS boxes. If you have a gigabit-capable switch, you'll immediately notice faster copy speeds when moving large video files between the NAS and a workstation. I ran a quick real-world test moving a 30 GB 4K footage file from a laptop with a 2.5 GBE NIC to the NAS. In a perfect world, you'd expect roughly 250 megabytes per second, and that's exactly what we saw on a clean network. The transfer hit 255 megabytes per second and stayed consistent across the entire file. What this tells you is that the NAS is actually able to push data through its network stack without choking, which is essential for collaborative environments where multiple users are pulling data simultaneously. If you're still on a 1 GB only infrastructure, the TVS 675 will still work fine, it just drops to that speed. The downside is you won't get the same future-proof feel if you upgrade your network later, because you'll need a compatible switch and NICs to tap the full 2.5 GBE advantage. So, if you're planning a network overhaul, this NAS aligns well. If not, you might be paying for speed you won't use right away. Now for the storage side. 6 bays mean you can start with 3-4 TB drives in a RAID 5 configuration, giving you about 8 TB of usable space with redundancy. The flexibility to add or swap drives later is a plus, but the real benefit comes from the 2 M.2 slots. Those slots can house either PCIe Gen 3x1 SSDs or SATA 6GB/S drives to act as cache. In everyday use, I found that installing a modest 500 GB NVMe SSD as read cache shaved off roughly 1,520 seconds from large folder scans in Windows Explorer. That may sound small, but when you have a media library that constantly reshuffles, that latency adds up. For a home user who just wants a quick open folder anywhere experience, the cache is a pleasant surprise. For a small office that needs to run multiple virtual machines off the same pool, the cache can mean the difference between a smooth workflow and a jittery one. The CPU, while not a server-grade Xeon, is decent for software transcoding on the fly. I set up Plex on the TVS 675 and streamed a 1080p movie to a Roku device while the server was simultaneously handling a 4K stream to a tablet. The 8-core chip handled both streams without dropping frames, but there was a noticeable rise in CPU temperature, hovering around 75 C under sustained load. The firmware throttles a bit when it hits those temps, so you might see a slight dip in bitrate during peak usage. If your media server workload is heavy, multiple 4K streams at once, you might want to consider a higher-end model or add more RAM to give the CPU breathing room. Speaking of RAM, the stock 8 GB is sufficient for basic file serving, a few Docker containers, and light virtualization. The QNAP ecosystem lets you expand up to 64 gigabytes, which is a solid path if you foresee heavier apps like a full-time CI/CD pipeline or a dedicated surveillance hub. The built-in QVR Pro can handle up to 16 cameras, but you'll certainly feel the strain if you try to push more than 8 high-resolution feeds without upgrading RAM. So, for a family that wants a couple of indoor cameras or a small office monitoring a few doors, the default memory will suffice. For a larger security setup, plan on the upgrade. Another practical point is the USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports. They're capable of 10 gigabits per second transfers, which means you can plug in an external SSD.